The core technology behind a $4 trillion empire was once offered for sale for less than the price of a small house in Silicon Valley. The undisputed king of the internet was handed the keys to the future, and they flatly refused. Why would anyone pass up the deal of the century? To understand the magnitude of this miscalculation, you have to remember what it felt like to navigate the internet in the late 90s. The World Wide Web was experiencing a violent, explosive expansion. Millions of web pages were spawning every month. A fire hose of human knowledge, commercial ambition, and absolute garbage was pouring onto servers around the globe. But there was a massive structural problem. The internet had no map. Finding a specific piece of information was an exercise in pure, agonizing frustration. If you booted up a heavy beige desktop computer and navigated to a search engine like AltaVista, Lycos, or Excite, you were playing a lottery. These early systems operated on a painfully primitive logic. When you typed in a word, the engine simply scanned its index and counted. The more times your search term appeared on a page, the higher that page ranked. There was no nuance, no concept of authority, no way to tell if a page was written by a university professor or a teenager in a basement. Webmasters immediately weaponized this vulnerability. They realized that to dominate the search results, they didn't need to provide good answers. They just needed to manipulate the math. They stuffed thousands of invisible keywords into the background of their websites. They plastered popular search terms across their metadata. If you searched for a hospital, you were just as likely to land on a conspiracy blog that had spammed the word medical 500 times in white text on a white background. The tools designed to organize the internet were drowning in the exact chaos they were supposed to cure. Above this digital wasteland sat one undisputed titan, Yahoo. Yahoo was not a search engine in the way we understand the term today. It was a portal. It was a massive hand-curated directory of the web, organized into neat categories by an army of human editors. It was the digital equivalent of a massive yellow pages, and humans personally decided which sites deserved to be listed. In 1998, Yahoo was the most visited destination on the planet. Their business model was straightforward, heavily defended, and immensely profitable. The goal was to keep your eyes on Yahoo. They wanted to show you the news, provide your email, feed you stock quotes, and host your sports scores. Every second you spent inside the Yahoo ecosystem was a second they could monetize with flashing banner ads. The absolute last thing Yahoo wanted to do was help you find what you were looking for and immediately send you to another website. In the boardrooms of the late 90s, the concept of a dedicated, highly efficient search engine was considered a terrible business model. Why would any rational company spend millions of dollars building a machine designed to aggressively push customers away? The portal model was gospel. Attention was the only currency that mattered. Captivity was the goal. This philosophy was so deeply entrenched that it blinded an entire generation of executives to a mathematical revolution quietly happening in a cramped dorm room at Stanford University. Larry Page arrived at Stanford in 1995. Raised by two computer science instructors, he grew up in a house overflowing with tech magazines, raw circuits, and code. He possessed a relentless systems-level intelligence. When it came time to pick a topic for his doctoral dissertation, he fixated on a strangely abstract puzzle. He wanted to map the mathematical structure of the internet. Specifically, Page became obsessed with backlinks. A backlink is simply the connection formed when one website links to another. To Page, these links were not just navigational pathways. They were votes. If a website linked to another page, it was making a judgment. It was essentially saying, this destination has value. But Page realized that not all votes are created equal. A link from the homepage of Harvard University carried a fundamentally different gravitational pull than a link from a forgotten hobby blog. He borrowed this elegant framework directly from the world of academic publishing. In science, a research paper's importance isn't just judged by what it says. It is judged by how many other prominent scientists cite it in their own work. Importance is a web of peer review. Page wanted to force the internet to peer review itself. He needed help building the architecture to test this theory, which led him to a fellow Stanford graduate student named Sergey Brin. Brin was a mathematical prodigy. Born in Moscow, his family fled the Soviet Union when he was a child. He possessed a staggering capacity for complex mathematics and an equally stubborn personality. When Page and Brin first met during a campus tour, they spent the entire afternoon arguing. They clashed over urban planning, technology, and philosophy. But beneath the friction, they recognized a shared intellectual obsession. They were both intensely driven to solve problems the rest of the world either ignored or accepted as unsolvable. Working with a third student, Scott Hassanu wrote a massive portion of the original code page, and Brin built a prototype. They called it Backrub. Backrub ran on a terrifying Frankenstein of borrowed university hardware. The Stanford dorm room was carpeted in discount computer parts, exposed cables, and hard drives stacked precariously on top of each other. The machine unleashed a web crawler that mapped the link structure of the internet. Then, it ran those links through a revolutionary algorithm they called PageRank. It didn't just count the votes. It evaluated the quality of the voters. A page linked by highly important sites became mathematically important itself, which then amplified the weight of any site it chose to link to. The result was staggering. When you typed a query into Backrub, you didn't get a wall of keyword-stuffed spam. You got exactly what you were looking for, usually in the top 3 results. It cut through the noise with surgical precision. But there was a severe problem. Backrub was hungry. The crawler required so much computing power and consumed so much data that it began eating Stanford's network alive. At one point, these 2 graduate students were siphoning nearly half of the university's total internet bandwidth. The IT department was furious. Complaints were rolling in. The project was entirely out of control. Page and Brin were not looking to become tech CEOs. They were academics. They wanted to finish their doctoral degrees, publish their findings, and move on with their lives in academia. To do that, they needed to get this massive, bandwidth-hogging monster out of their dorm room. They decided to sell it. They packaged their technology, their algorithm, and their entire index, and took it to the undisputed masters of the web. They walked into Yahoo and offered to hand over the key to the internet's future. The price was $1 million. Yahoo looked at the offering, looked at the price, and walked away. To Yahoo's leadership, this wasn't a missed opportunity. It was a distraction. Their portal was generating massive traffic. Why would they pay $1 million for an algorithm whose entire purpose was to kick users off the Yahoo homepage faster? Desperate to unload the project, Page and Brin kept knocking on doors. They secured a meeting with George Bell, the CEO of the search portal Excite. Again, they asked for $1 million. Bell wasn't impressed. The negotiations dragged. At one point, a prominent venture capitalist backing Excite managed to talk to Stanford students down to a staggeringly low price, $750,000. Even at a deep discount, George Bell refused. He reportedly didn't like the fact that the technology was too good. If users found what they wanted instantly, they wouldn't stick around Excite's platform to look at banner ads. The efficiency of the technology was viewed as a financial liability. Nobody wanted it. The portal executives were operating flawlessly within a framework that made perfect sense at the time. Their logic was sound, their math was correct, but their entire paradigm was about to be vaporized. With no more buyers, a frustrated university department, and a search engine that kept getting better, Page and Brin faced a crossroads. They could pull the plug and write their dissertations, or they could do the one thing they never intended to do: start a company. The turning point happened on the front porch of a Stanford professor named David Cheriton. Cheriton had invited a friend over to meet the 2 students. That friend was Andy Bechtolsheim, the co-founder of Sun Microsystems. Bechtolsheim was sharp, impatient, and brilliant. Page and Brin fired up a computer on the porch and gave him a demonstration. It lasted exactly 15 minutes. Bechtolsheim didn't need to see more. He understood the academic citation model instantly. He saw how deeply superior the results were. While Yahoo and Excite saw a machine that pushed users away, Bechtolsheim saw a machine that people would trust implicitly. He did some rapid mental math regarding microtransactions for sponsored links. "I don't want to waste time," Bechtolsheim said. "I'm sure it'll work out." He went out to his car, pulled out his checkbook, and wrote a check for $100,000. He made it out to an entity called Google Inc. There was only one problem. Google Inc. did not exist. Page and Brin hadn't actually filed any legal paperwork yet. They were holding a massive check that they literally could not deposit. Professor Cheriton stepped up and wrote a matching check for another $100,000. Suddenly, the 2 reluctant academics were sitting on $200,000 of venture capital. They raced to file the incorporation papers, open a bank account, and find an office. In September 1998, they rented a garage in Menlo Park, California, from a woman named Susan Witch. She charged them $1,700 a month. The garage was outfitted with a ping-pong table, terrible bright blue carpet, and servers cobbled together from whatever hardware they could afford. The academic experiment was dead. The company was born. What followed was a masterclass in the sheer power of a superior product. Google didn't run expensive television commercials. They didn't engage in massive marketing campaigns. They just worked better than anything else on Earth. When a user typed in a web address and landed on Google, the experience was profoundly There were no flashing banners. There were no weather reports, no stock tickers, no sports headlines. There was just a logo, a search bar, and a vast expanse of clean, white space. It was silent. In an era where every other website was screaming for your attention, Google simply waited for instructions. It promised that if you asked a question, it would provide the answer and get out of your way. Users who tried Google once almost never went back to AltaVista or Excite. The contrast was too stark. Word of mouth began to spread like a virus. Stanford's own internal search function began redirecting to the garage in Menlo Park. Tech journalists caught wind of the algorithm that actually understood context. By the end of 1999, the clean white page was processing 500,000 queries a day. By the year 2000, that number had exploded to an incomprehensible 100 million searches a day. This hypergrowth attracted the absolute titans of Silicon Valley venture capital. Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia, capital the firms that had backed Amazon and Apple, teamed up to inject $25 million into the young company. It was a massive validation. But inside the company, the tension was suffocating. Google was burning through millions of dollars just to keep the servers running. The sheer volume of traffic required an ever-expanding physical infrastructure of hard drives and processors. They were providing a world-class service to tens of millions of people, absolutely for free. Outside the walls of their new offices, the tech industry was collapsing. The dot-com bubble was violently bursting. Companies that had raised billions on empty promises were evaporating overnight. Investors were getting nervous. Google had the attention of the world, but they had absolutely no way to monetize it. They refused to clutter their pristine homepage with banner ads. They refused to sell their search results to the highest bidder. If they compromised the integrity of the algorithm, they would become just another portal. They needed a mechanism to turn attention into capital without destroying the user experience. The solution they engineered didn't just save the company, it rewired global commerce. In late 2000, Google launched AdWords. The concept was an exercise in pure advertisers could bid on specific keywords. If a user searched for running shoes, they would see the organic search results. But they would also see small, unobtrusive text ads from shoe companies. This was not a billboard on a highway, shouting at everyone who drove by in the hopes that one person might want a pair of shoes. This was a targeted answer, delivered at the exact millisecond a consumer was actively asking a question. Furthermore, the economics were ruthlessly efficient. Google only charged the advertiser if the user actually clicked on the ad. AdWords fundamentally erased the friction of advertising. It connected human intent with commercial supply instantly. The revenue numbers that followed defy logic. In 2001, Google brought in $86 million. The next year, $440 million. The year after that, $1.5 billion. It was a perfect, self-sustaining flywheel. Better search results brought more users. More users brought more advertisers. The billions of dollars in advertising revenue bought better servers and hired the smartest engineers on Earth, which created even better search results. While Google was printing money, Yahoo was realizing the catastrophic scale of its error. In a twist of bitter irony, Yahoo had started licensing Google's search technology in the year 2000. They were paying roughly $7 million a year to use the exact algorithm they had refused to buy for $1 million. Every time a user searched on Yahoo, they were being handed a Google result. Yahoo was effectively paying to train its own loyal audience to expect Google-level accuracy. By 2002, the writing was on the wall. The portal model was dying. The internet was too vast to be categorized by human editors. Search was the only way forward. And Yahoo didn't own the engine. Yahoo CEO at the time, Terry Semel, arranged a meeting with Larry Page and Sergey Brin. He wanted to correct the mistake of his predecessors. He wanted to acquire Google. But the power dynamic had inverted. Page and Brin were no longer desperate graduate students trying to unload a distraction. They were commanding a financial juggernaut. They floated an acquisition price of $1 billion. Semel agreed. But as the paperwork began to materialize, the Google founders looked at their internal growth metrics, looked across the table at Yahoo, and raised the price. They now wanted $3 billion. Semel balked the price, felt absurd. The deal collapsed. It was Yahoo's second chance to own the future, and their second refusal. 2 years later, In August 2004, Google bypassed the traditional gatekeepers of Wall Street and held a highly unconventional initial public offering. They priced their shares at $85. By the end of the first day of trading, the company was valued at $23 billion. Page and Brin became billionaires before they turned Andy Bechtolsheim's $100,000 Porch check transformed into billions. Susan Wojcicki, the woman who rented them the garage, eventually became the CEO of YouTube. The tech industry, battered and cynical after the dot-com crash, suddenly had proof that massive value could still be created. You just needed actual substance. What happened after the IPO is the story of absolute planetary dominance. Google used its vast ocean of ad revenue to map the physical surface of the earth. They built Gmail. They bought a scrappy video sharing site called YouTube for $1.5 billion a deal that critics mocked, which now looks like the steal of the century. They bought Android and effectively took control of the mobile operating systems for half the globe. They reorganized into a colossal conglomerate called Alphabet. But measuring Google purely by its market cap or its product list misses the psychological reality of what those two students achieved. They changed the baseline mechanics of human memory. Before Google, acquiring knowledge required friction. It required a library, an encyclopedia, or a phone call. Finding an answer took time. Today, a question rarely survives for more than 10 seconds. The friction between curiosity and knowledge has been reduced to zero. An entire generation has grown up utterly unable to comprehend a reality where you couldn't instantly retrieve any fact, location, or image from a piece of glass in your pocket. They achieved a level of cultural saturation that no corporation in human history has ever touched. Their brand name shed its capital letter and became a verb. You don't? Microsoft a spreadsheet. You don't? Apple a text message. But you Google everything? And what became of the undisputed king of the 90s? Yahoo spent the next 2 decades bleeding relevance. They passed on buying Google. Years later, they would pass on buying Facebook. They rejected a $44 billion buyout offer from Microsoft. Finally, after years of executive turnover and declining traffic, Yahoo sold its core internet business to Verizon. The price was $4.48 billion, barely a fraction of what Google had asked for in 2002. The gulf between these two companies wasn't about funding or engineering talent. It was about philosophy. Yahoo believed the internet was a destination, a walled garden, where users should be trapped and monetized. Google realized the internet was a utility. The winner wouldn't be the one who built the best walls. The winner would be the one who built the fastest doors. It is easy to look at a $4 trillion empire and assume it was inevitable, that it was the result of a flawless master plan executed by corporate visionaries. But the reality is far more fragile. It started with a messy dorm room, a frustrated university IT department, and 2 students who just wanted to finish their homework. They stumbled onto the fact that the digital world was held together by votes, and they simply figured out how to count them. They tried to give it away, and when the world said no, they built the future themselves. We dissect the invisible machinery of the tech world. If you're fascinated by the split-second decisions that rewrite our reality, subscribe and join the conversation. What was the first search engine you remember using before the white screen took over? Drop it in the comments below.